Hello everyone, this is part 18 of What If Naruto Formed a New Team, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Gaara promptly returned to Konoha in a foul mood after helping Naruto and their sensei dispatch their pursuers. He decided he would dull down the details of the conflict when he recapped it to his entourage. He paused as he entered the gates of Konoha. Entourage. Perhaps that was a better label for the group of knuckleheads he flocked with, a word he would use more frequently over posse or a retinue any day. There was no describing how badly his head hurt. If he didn't know any better, Gaara would have guessed that a speeding freight train had paid him a visit not too long ago. It was unfortunate that he and Naruto were being targeted by a band of Nukkenen so early on, he noted. A year or more of training and Gaara surmised they'd be able to adequately defend themselves from S-class threats, but it seemed time was not on their side. How much longer before the next attempt? He wondered, finding himself a bit bitter over the subject. How much longer before they realize I live here as well? Not too long, as Jiraiya had put it. What was that saying? Birds of a feather flock together. Gaara snorted as he turned the corner, guessing that next time he and Naruto would have to act as a unit to fend off their enemies, or better yet, have Haku join them in a surprise attack, and perhaps the whole damn entourage could get in on it. He decided after careful consideration that it was better if his friends did not get too deeply involved in the matter. It was a problem he and Naruto had to deal with, not them. It wouldn't be worth them risking their lives in such a one-sided endeavor. Gaara didn't want to sound like a pessimist, but he was fairly sure it was only a matter of time before the Akatsuki would regroup and track him down, hauling him in even if he was kicking and screaming all the way. He had sensed the power Itachi and his partner had possessed and he was in no place to make light of it. Temari and Kankuro had caught him off guard when they stepped in front of him, demanding to know where he had been. Haku and Sakura also looked at him as if he held vital information. They weren't far off in that respect. Well, was he up to no good? Temari was beginning to harbor the same detestation for Sasuke as her younger brother. What happened out there? Two dangerous Nukkenen attacked Naruto in the next village over, Gaara responded, ignoring the gasps. Sasuke intervened, as did Jiraiya-sensei and I. They retreated once they realized they were outnumbered. He locked eyes with Haku. Itachi was there. Haku and Sakura were eerily quiet for a long moment and Temari and Kankuro gave them questioning looks. As if understanding that it was a matter Gaara intended to discuss privately with Sakura, Haku ushered Temari and Kankuro along as if the news held little impact. Well done then, Gaara-kun. He turned to the elder Sand siblings. Tell me, you two, have you ever gone swimming before? Temari didn't like the fact they were being excluded but decided she could milk information from Haku later with enough persistence. Kankuro, though, decided to play along. Swim. Not in anything bigger than a tub, I'd wager. Then this should be quite the education for you, Haku muttered, guiding him along, having an ideal lake in mind for the lesson. We'll meet up with you later, if that's all right. Sakura looked a bit torn to see her new friend swept along so brusquely. Gaara spoke up for her, amused. Teach them well, Haku. It'll be valuable to them in missions outside sooner. Temari wore an irritated expression as she followed after her brother and the dark-haired boy. At last Gaara had a moment alone with the pink-haired girl. He wasn't pleased to be the bearer of bad news for her, but he wasn't about to lie about the situation. She was hugging him a moment later, murmuring into his shoulder and his headache immediately disappeared, much to his astonishment. You said Itachi was there, right? Please tell me you're okay. I'm fine. Naruto's fine. He paused, the next words he spoke leaving a sour taste in his mouth, but Sasuke was injured. He was foolish enough to challenge Itachi and he was beaten badly. Guy-sensei brought him to the hospital. Sakura pulled away, taking the news better than he had anticipated. I understand. She looked away from him for a moment, aware that he disliked Sasuke. Will you go to the hospital with me to see if he's alright? No. Something stopped him from saying it outright. Even if he would have preferred to have left Sasuke for his brother to finish him off, he had still saved him. Maybe not for the Uchiha's sake, but for Sakura's. Gaara respected her enough to allow her happiness even if he was not the source of it. So Sasuke would live to see another day, it seemed. I'll go with you, Sakura-chan. His voice was low, with an equal balance of pacification and frustration imbued in it. Her eyes were thankful but she didn't smile, she wasn't able to. Sakura was frightened, struck with the thought of what may have happened to Sasuke if Gaara and Naruto had not also been there to break up the fight. She knew the end result of that situation. Gaara walked beside her silently as they turned around and headed across town for the hospital. Once they had been directed to the Uchiha's room, Gaara's mood had not improved. Sakura's presence, however, kept it from downgrading. He stood near the door with his arms folded as she sat beside the unconscious boy's hospital bed, her face racked with worry. A nurse had stopped to check in on Sasuke shortly and then departed, seeing he remained in stable condition. I remember the promise I made to you, Sakura said quietly, touching his hand gently, tentatively. I'm sorry that this happened again. If I had known, I would've. Gaara was watching her with wary eyes and it made her uncomfortable. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she continued, I don't want him to hurt you again. It won't happen again. I won't let it happen, Sasuke-kun. She drew her hand away and sighed, feeling strung out. Sakura stood and noted that Gaara did not appear hostile over her renewed vow to her teammate. In fact, he seemed more fascinated by her devotion than upset by it. She was then unaware, however, that he highly doubted Sasuke would take her words to heart the same way he did in that moment. Let's go now. He needs to rest. The pink-haired Kunoichi exited the room as he held the door open for her, Gaara-kun. He turned to her as he stepped out into the hallway as well, giving her an expectant look. You saved him, didn't you? When he got hurt, Sakura had deduced that was why Gaara had been acting so oddly when he had returned, that's why he wasn't hurt any worse than this. It wasn't much of a rescue. The red-haired boy replied, not making a big deal over it. She nodded, smiling gratefully at the confirmation, thank you, Gaara-kun. Gaara shrugged, finding the entire notion of Sasuke was bothering him much less than it normally did. Perhaps it was because he had witnessed that he was not very much a hindrance to his friendship with Sakura. In fact, Sakura seemed to be getting closer to him daily, he had noticed. He then offered to take her to lunch at Ichiraku Ramen since Naruto had thrown his extra vouchers at him shortly before leaving on his trip with Jiraiya. Sakura meekly tried to decline, saying her parents would have liked to spend at least 2 meals of the day with her, but once he insisted she gave up and followed him out the front of the hospital, trying to suppress her delighted grin. Once at the restaurant, Sakura had already decided on what type of ramen she wanted. They had taken their seats, and he judged it then to be too late to flee upon seeing Sato was there as well, chatting loudly and on his third bowl of beef ramen. Sato, very annoyingly, very amiably, greeted Gaara, hey. Gaara-kun, I haven't seen you in a while. How have you been? It appeared he didn't hold a grudge against him after their fight during the Chunin exam, if he could recall it at all. Busy, Gaara responded truthfully, and nodded to Tama when he noticed she was seated beside Sato, still not finished with her first bowl of ramen. What are you doing here? After training Shino and Sunshine ditched me like they had better things to do, the silver-haired boy summarized, smiling at his companion. They kinda dumped me on Tama, so as conciliation I decided to buy her lunch. Kinda dumped. He makes himself sound like a 5-year-old. Gaara found the Hitaki's linguistics to be a bit outlandish. I actually requested that they let me steal you, Tama corrected, her smile somewhat coquettish and only Sato missed it. We haven't seen each other in a while, you know. Sakura grinned at her from across the way, admiring her take-charge attitude. In her opinion, however, she would think of Sato to be the last boy any girl would want to pursue. I mean, sheesh, he causes more trouble than even Naruto. And that's a difficult record to beat. Gaara agreed with the idea entirely, something she was not conscious of. Sato just annoyed him in general. Sakura ordered ramen for herself and Gaara while Sato proceeded to talk the redhead's ears off. Clearly, Sakura noted, the boy hadn't been out in a while, he probably needed to purge his system of all the pent-up nonsense in his head. Gaara was relieved when the other pair finished their meals and stood to leave. Sato, of course, before departing, tossed in his 2 cents, enjoy your date, you two. He wasn't about to be impeded by the chattering dolt, at least now we can. Sakura laughed at Gaara's response before taking a bite of her ramen. In a vain effort to relax, Naruto and his mentor stopped by the local hot springs. The blonde boy sat beside Jiraiya moodily in the hot water, very deep in thought. I've got to get stronger fast if I'm going to be Hokage. When I was fighting those two, it's like they weren't even trying. How are Gaara-kun and I supposed to contend with guys as strong as that? He then recalled something that had really been irking him. Hey Ero-sensei. Jiraiya glanced over to him, adjusting the cloth on top of his head. What is it, Naruto? Still hung up on that fight from earlier? Naruto nodded. It's just that Itachi guy, he had shadow clones too and he could make his explode. He blew all of mine away like they were nothing. I'll bet. Jiraiya scratched his chin. All of his techniques are borderline Cage level. I hope you know he was already in the Anbu Black Ops by the time he was your age. How did he do it? I've got to know. I mean, I could really use a trick like that. The blonde boy didn't want to make a fuss over it, but he was extremely frustrated that he had encountered someone more adept with Cage Bunshin than himself. The Toad Sage thought about it for a moment before answering. Fundamentally it's easy enough to understand, but mastering a technique like that is something that would take even a Junin several years. Naruto gave him an annoyed look and his teacher gave up and explained it anyway. Consider this, Naruto, you use an unusually large amount of chakra when you make shadow clones, let's say 6 or 7, sometimes even more. Jiraiya began, folding his arms. In this case the amount of chakra you gather is not distributed to the group of clones you intend to make, but to an individual clone. That is what gives it an unstable, bomb-like quality. All that chakra in one clone. Isn't that a waste of energy? Naruto pointed out keenly, finding his chakra control lessons had done him a lot of good. Think of it as a singular clone on steroids, the Toad Sage suggested. It's kind of a gamble when you're making a clone like that. Too much chakra will overload the little crapper and blow him up on the spot, too little and it's barely even worth calling a clone. The blonde boy raised his eyebrows. Yeah, that part I've known for a while. The tricky part is molding the chakra correctly. This isn't quite the same as the Rasengan, Jiraiya added, smiling at his pupil as he listened intently. The extra amount of chakra made for it is molded into a tightly packed, volatile kind of reservoir inside of the clone's chakra coils. You follow me? That's pretty complicated. It's worse, actually. His mentor's face became more serious. The clone you make won't be able to use any techniques without triggering the bomb. Also, the excess chakra the clone has cushions against enemy blows so they'll probably last longer, but using up that extra chakra can just downgrade it to a regular clone. There's a lot you have to keep in mind. Naruto took it into consideration, not yet discouraged. I get it, Ero-sensei. But, how do you know all this exactly? Jiraiya made a pathetic face. I'm old now. I've been around long enough so see all the weirdness and then some. His pupil sighed, figuring that was a good enough answer. The Toad Sage was honestly impressed with his student's greater level of maturity. He guessed that it must have come about after the exam when his friends and village were in peril, or perhaps he had just grown into it. They're all growing up. Haku and the Sand Kid too, though Gaara is just wound too tight to exercise restraint at all sometimes. It was another thing he commended Naruto and Haku for, patience. Well, this skill is basically a matter of calculation, instinct and good judgment. Jiraiya concluded his lesson with his student. All things you could improve on, actually. Naruto took offense. What? Are you saying I can't do this? Is that it, you perv? I can totally do this, piece of cake. His declaration continued even further. You know what? I'll figure this whole thing out and then improve it. How's that? Jiraiya looked genuinely intrigued. Alright, I've had it with just sitting around doing nothing. Are we gonna find this lady or not? Naruto stood up and left the water. Through with slacking. Come on Ero-sensei, let's get going. His teacher chuckled, following his pupil and wishing he still had the energy Naruto possessed. Late that evening they had decided to take a break from the day-long search. Neither of the pair were in very high spirits, and Naruto was too tired to complain when Jiraiya led them into a tavern for some rest. The place was dimly lit and smelled horribly of cigarettes. Naruto scrunched up his nose, disliking the smoky atmosphere, and followed Jiraiya wordlessly along the front. When his mentor halted abruptly, Naruto bumped into his back clumsily. Hey. Ero-sensei, what are you doing? Jiraiya had paused and was staring across the room wearing a confused expression. On the opposite side of the restaurant, a blonde woman was shouting at a waiter to bring her more sake. At first the toad sage had thought his eyes may have been deceiving him in the poor lighting of the place, but when the woman noticed him her eyes widened in realization and he knew he had found who they were looking for. Well, Tsunade, it's been a while, hasn't it? He chortled, grinning, finding it typical to find her in such a place. Naruto's eyes perked up. Huh. The old lady's here. Jiraiya gave him a sidelong nod and Naruto decided it was time to be quiet and let his teacher do the talking. They sat at the table Tsunade and her group were settled at, and Naruto wondered why Jiraiya was suddenly so light-hearted. It wasn't much of a discovery, but one thing he noted was that there in fact was a young woman with Tsunade, holding a pig in her lap and giving him an odd look. Hello Shizune, Tun, Jiraiya greeted, nodding to them. I hope you've all been well. Shizune gave him a weak smile, but it quickly disappeared when Tsunade spoke up. What the hell are you doing here, Jiraiya? The black-haired woman offered to share her plate of snacks with Naruto in order to distract him and he gladly accepted. Come on now, Tsunade. I thought you'd be happy to see me. Jiraiya smirked, well aware he was annoying her as much as he used to. Don't kid yourself like that, Jiraiya. The blonde woman began shuffling a deck of cards, not very interested in her old teammate's presence. Her eyes skimmed over Naruto and faint recognition flickered in them. And who's this? A new apprentice. He looks funny, very different from your last student. Who looks funny, lady? Naruto inquired grumpily. Tsunade gave him an amused look. Jiraiya's previous pupil was a very bright boy. Polite, popular and quite handsome too. Not unlike his teacher. Jiraiya agreed, grinning goofily. Naruto was annoyed but remained quiet, helping himself to the snack plate while he listened. Shizune gave him an apologetic look and he wondered if maybe Tsunade was even more temperamental than Gaara. Relax, Naruto, the toad sage could sense the boy's unease. I've trained one Hokage, what's one more, eh? Tsunade's eyes narrowed warningly, don't get the boy's hopes up. She dealt the cards she had shuffled and Jiraiya looked over his hand, noting it was fairly good. His expression became solemn a moment later. All right, Tsunade, I'll get to the point. I'm here to offer you the lure of God. I'm Hokage on behalf of the Hidden Leaf Village. The hair on the back of Naruto's neck was on end upon hearing the words. Well, do you accept? Shizune's eyes widened at the offer and she gave a pleading look to the woman beside her. After a moment Tsunade answered, I refuse. The blonde boy stared at the busty woman across the table from his teacher, unable to believe that she had declined. Offering one's life all for the sake of protecting one village. That's a fool's bet. Tsunade spat bitterly, even I know better than to put my life on the line for something as fleeting as being a martyr, Jiraiya. How can you say that? Naruto roared, jumping up from his seat angrily, someone like you doesn't even deserve to be considered for such an honor. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at his pupil but made no attempt to interrupt him. Maybe Naruto would be able to convince Tsunade otherwise, he was hoping. Tsunade also stood, her cards down on the table, glaring at the indignant blonde boy. Is that so, kid? You want to take this outside? You bet I do. Jiraiya sighed, rubbing the side of his head in exasperation. Shizune also looked troubled as she watched the two blondes leave the tavern, causing an uproar. I'm so sorry, Jiraiya-sama. Tsunade-sama's been a bit off recently. I can tell. Jiraiya followed Shizune and the pig outside, wondering if they should intervene. The street outside was by then dark and empty and it appeared a fight was imminent. See this, boy. Tsunade fingered the necklace adorning her bosom. If you can defeat me I'll concede and let you have this necklace of mine. You can keep the stupid necklace after I beat you. Naruto snapped hastily and he turned to see Jiraiya had come to stand beside him. You know, Squirt, that necklace is extremely valuable. It belonged to Tsunade's grandfather, the very first Hokage. The toad sage gave him a brief history lesson. Just thought you'd like to know. He backed off after that and Naruto changed his mind at the mentioning of the Shodaime Hokage. On second thought, Bar-chan, that necklace would look way better on me than it does on you. Not amused, Tsunade rushed at him, flicking him with her index finger and sending him crashing down to the ground with incredible force. She was surprised to find she had only destroyed a shadow clone. Well. It looks like the kid is smarter than he looks. All that time I was only talking to a shadow clone. He must have substituted himself with it before leaving the pub. Naruto decided that her unprecedented strength could cause him some serious problems. Holy crap. She's strong. I've got to fight carefully or she'll poke a hole right through me. Shadow clones descended from the rooftops in pairs, attacking in unison, trying to test her defenses. Tsunade destroyed them with minimal effort, appearing rather bored. It was then Naruto concluded her defenses were up to snuff. From a vantage point on top of a telephone pole, Naruto hurled a Fuma Shuriken he had been saving for a special occasion, Demon Wind Shuriken, Windmill of Shadows. The S projectile soared for her and she leapt over it, turning to see its follow-through trajectory. Tsunade was mildly impressed when the Shuriken transformed and reverted back to its original form, Naruto, and he hurled a kunai at her with a cry. Pretty clever, she commented, catching the kunai and she tossed it back at him. The knife met its mark and destroyed a shadow clone. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. I thought for sure that was the real one. So where's the blue, swirling light of the Rasengan grazed past her face, nicking her cheek. Naruto landed behind her and let the spiraling sphere dissipate. His attack had been more of a warning, but he hadn't expected her to freeze where she stood after his mock assault. Impossible. Jiraiya has taught this boy the Rasengan. Tsunade's eyes flickered over to the toad hermit who stood watching smugly nearby, but how could he have mastered it so young? He's just a kid. Naruto's control over the technique was quite shocking. If he had wanted to, he could have easily blown her head off of her shoulders. Since he hadn't, Tsunade decided to seize the opportunity to put the boy in his place. She punched a fissure in the ground and the blonde boy avoided it easily, annoyed that Jiraiya was half cheering, half barking at him from the sidelines. See it out, Ero-Sennin, I'm trying to concentrate. After putting some distance between himself and Tsunade, Naruto summoned a fair-sized battle toad. Do me a favor and spit some oil, will you, Mr. Toad? The blonde muttered and then grinned to see that the toad was able to comply. From a ways off, Tsunade frowned inwardly. What is that kid up to now? You gave him toads too, Jiraiya. The toad sage merely shrugged from his spot beside Shizune. Naruto's toad spat a mouthful of pale liquid at Tsunade and she moved to dodge, her eyes widening in shock as Naruto tossed an exploding tag at the oil and detonated it. Jiraiya and Shizune leapt out of the way of the attack as flames filled the street, missing Tsunade but leaving roadside signs and stands much worse for the wear. Tsunade was perched on top of a lamppost and gave Jiraiya an annoyed glare. He chuckled sheepishly. That one was Gamabunta's fault. I didn't teach him that. Naruto watched her disappear from her position, wondering if she was yet intimidated. Where'd she go? A relentless punch connected with his back and sent him flying down the street, crashing down to the road and digging up dirt as he tumbled. Tsunade took the liberty of dispatching the troublesome toad as well. It looks like he's more like Jiraiya's former student than I gave him credit for, but still, this proves nothing. Naruto hobbled to his feet, not ready to give up the fight. Keep it coming, Bar-chan. Is that all you got? I win. Like hell. That was a cheap shot. I can keep going. The blonde boy yowled, unwilling to concede. I won't lose to you. I'm not like you, because someday I'll be Hokage. That's my dream. Tsunade fell silent after he had declared his goal, as if the words meant something to her. I was holding back, Bar-chan. You could have had it much worse. Naruto couldn't help but brag since he could have easily summoned Gamabunta to stomp her. You didn't win this one, not by a long shot. Tsunade settled her hands on her hips and frowned at the hot b-boy. No holding back next time then, kid. If you're that stubborn about it, I'll offer you a rematch 5 days from now. Then we can go all out and see who's truly worthy of this necklace. Naruto brushed the dirt from his pants and watched as Tsunade called for Shizune and Tun-Tun before they left. I'll show her. She'll see that she's wrong about being Hokage when I'm through with her. Jiraiya chuckled as he helped his wobbly pupil to his feet, wondering if Naruto's determination would affect Tsunade's decision on accepting the position of godime. Well done, Naruto. Normally I would have stopped you, but I had a feeling you'd put up a great fight after you defended yourself against the Akatsuki. Your strategy wasn't half bad. Yeah, well, she's lucky Haku-kun and Gaara-kun weren't here to tag team her with me. His teacher only laughed in response. That would definitely be something now, wouldn't it? Let's head back to the hotel now. I'm beat. We'll see if we can change her mind tomorrow. The next day, Temari and Kankuro made sure to inform Gaara that swimming was not one of their strong suits. It sucked, Kankuro announced bluntly. Haku's a good teacher and all, but he makes everything look easier than it actually is. At least you can keep your head above water. Temari grumbled to her brother, still annoyed. I don't like swimming. Join the club. Gaara smirked at her playfully. It's a necessary evil, Temari. You'll thank him one day. I doubt that. Haku's got an unfair advantage. That guy's like a fish almost, Kankuro added, finding his ability rather peculiar. If you'd rather skip out on today's lesson, you are more than welcome to train with me. Gaara suggested, fed up with their complaints. They immediately agreed and left the apartment before Haku could stop them. Later that morning, Tenten arrived at the Hyuga compound. Her primary concern was that Neji had not shown up for training at the designated time. She offered to go fetch him so Lee and Guy wouldn't be torn away from the youthful practice. At first she had suspected that he may have fallen ill. He was under a lot of stress lately and his immune system may have been suffering. Tenten dismissed that highly unlikely idea. She knew him well and his overall health was spotless. Hopefully the branch house isn't giving him a hard time again. She was aware that some of his cousins threw tantrums when they came across Neji and she knew that was always an unpleasant affair. It'll be safer if I just check myself. Hinata was tending to a small garden near the front of the mansion and Tenten figured she'd be the most help to her cause out of anyone living at the estate. Good morning, Hinata-chan. The shy girl looked up at her and smiled slightly. Oh, hello Tenten Onizen. It's good to see you. After the events of the invasion they had begun referring to each other with affectionate terms. Hinata couldn't help her habit of calling Neji her brother, and as a result begun treating Tenten as an older sister. Have you happened to have seen Neji, by any chance? Hinata shook her head. I'm afraid not. He hasn't been with you. Tenten sighed. No, he hasn't. Well, no problem. I'll keep looking. Thanks anyway, Hinata. She waved goodbye to the younger girl before moving on, not ready to give up her search so easily. That was weird. Usually Hinata's pretty good at knowing where people are. Tenten thought as she crossed over a small footbridge into the rear of the estate. Maybe I should have asked her to use her Byakugan for me. She halted in her tracks when a very familiar battle cry pierced the air. That's him all right. Tenten looked off to her right to see Neji in a courtyard with his uncle, evading shuriken and performing complex yuken attacks that he rarely ever used in her presence. Her chocolate eyes widened marginally, watching as the elegant fight progressed and suddenly she found herself walking away without even trying to call out to him. Hiashi didn't particularly intimidate her, but she had a feeling she had suddenly become unnecessary. Poking her nose in Hyuga business would only offend Neji, and besides, his skills will grow a lot faster if he trains with his uncle. Just the idea of her abilities becoming obsolete made her feel weak and lightheaded. Tenten found she no longer had the energy to return to her team's training grounds and spend time with Lee. She walked dejectedly back the way she came and tried to keep her head high as past members of the Hyuga clan. Hinata could tell something was not right as the older girl left the estate alone and she hoped it was nothing permanently damaging. Shortly after that, Tenten was in her forge, hammering away her frustrations as she mended a broken blade for Gecko Hayat after he had stopped by a few hours earlier. Her mind was all over the place as she worked on autopilot repairing the splintered sword. It was a very cathartic process, pounding hot metal back into shape. She was upset that she had let herself become weak enough so that Neji had to move on to more challenging opponents. It's not really a bad thing, Tenten admitted, rubbing the sweat out of her eyes with the back of her arm. It'd be stupid for me to go back there and ask him to train with me. It would be more like a sympathy spar than anything. He'd go easy on me, I bet. The heat of the blazing hearth was licking at her back and she grimaced, turning the blade over and began to reshape it again. I must be crazy. It's not a big deal. It's useless to expect him to wait on me thinking that he's sentimental about our relationship. Suddenly relationship didn't feel like the right word. Even friendship didn't quite describe it. What the heck am I supposed to call it anyway? Association. Partnership. Everything is starting to sound so goddamn tacky. Tenten exchanged hammers as she began to work on the front edge of the blade, wanting to make sure it was the appropriate thickness. She worked through the rough edge with practiced hands and slowly began to realize that she wasn't giving herself enough credit. I am valuable in lots of respects, she affirmed, readjusting the blade and beginning to hammer away at it again. I'm one of the few people of this village who's in this trade. Lots of ninja depend on me. Tenten had nearly forgotten that she had a life existing outside of training with Neji, and she wasn't about to lose touch with it altogether. And just because he's never reciprocated my feelings doesn't mean I'm disposable to him, right? I can live with that. He doesn't have to go out of his way for me because my heart is big enough for the both of us. I won't let him down. She finished laminating the blade shortly after that and set it in a basin of water to cool. Glad that she had finished early, Tenten wiped the sweat off of her skin with a towel and changed shirts, locking the forge behind her after she left. Tenten recalled that when she got back from her next visit she'd have to fill Sabaku no Kankuro's order. A few minutes later she had reached the memorial stone and was glad to see Kakashi was not loitering around it as he normally did. Her eyes skimmed down the names listed on the stone of Ninja K in action. A set of names were placed side by side near the center of the stone with no surname for either. Takaharu and Chinatsu. They were listed with the rest of the Anbu who had been K in past missions, and Tenten sighed to herself, wondering where to start. I'm sorry that I didn't bring an offering for you guys today. I was working, Tenten apologized, as if they were standing right in front of her. You don't mind, I know. She searched for a subject to articulate to her parents. Well, you'll be glad to hear business picked up after the invasion. Oh, and 3 Black Ops bought replacement swords from me last week. They were so impressed with the quality. Silence answered her, but she was still smiling at the memory. They said they were just like your blades, Dad. The name Takaharu seemed to flash on the stone and her eyes dulled a bit. I actually came here to talk to you about something else, she admitted, her voice lowering gloomily. You remember the boy I spoke about last time? She continued as if the silence was speaking to her. Neither of us were able to achieve Chunin rank in the exam, but I know we've both gotten much stronger. Next year for sure. Tenten frowned at the stone again. I'd like to be with him, but it's as you said. I'm a rationalist. I always think of a reason not to say anything to him. I wish you guys weren't always right all of the time. The wind blew in the trees nearby and a flock of birds soared directly over Tenten as she kept speaking. Neji's got the romance of a log. She laughed as an afterthought and then fell quiet, realizing she wasn't feeling as light-hearted about the matter as she made herself appear. Could you maybe tell me, if you know? The stone shone in the sun as she hesitated. Is it hopeless? The silence remained and she ignored it, proceeding to ask them for their permission to pursue him. I want to become stronger and show him that I'm not a waste of time. You can understand that, right? She could almost hear her mother telling her that she was far too devoted to being a Kanoiki and had to loosen up a little. Tenten supplied an automatic response to the non-existent nagging, come on. The statistic still stands that for someone in my position there's over a 90% chance I'll S before S or marriage, you know. So don't argue, I won't complain anymore. They still tried to, it seemed. She sighed, accepting the fact she was talking to a slab of polished rock. I have to get back to work now. It was nice talking to you, Tenten concluded, feeling her spirit lighten a bit. Do me a favor and look after Neji while he trains today, because I can't. Naruto had time to train by himself as Jiraiya returned to the town to investigate and see if he could make Tsunade reconsider her rejection of the lure of Godime. A small grove beside a river was conveniently located outside of the village, and Naruto decided it was a secluded enough area for him to train undisturbed. He was resolute on the promise he made to master and to improve what Jiraiya called the Bunshin Daibakura, or Great Clone Explosion. Once he had found a reasonable spot to train in, he reflected on what Jiraiya had told him, so he said it was a tightly packed reservoir of chakra that's got to be inside of the clone's chakra coils. I guess I better figure out how much chakra one clone can take. Naruto calmed his thoughts and began to focus his chakra. He determined that it would be better to experiment with his clones from a distance should he be successful in his endeavor. As instructed, he made one clone to start with, forming the hand seal almost reflexively. He felt his chakra reserves drain the necessary chakra for the jutsu and then became aware of the sensation of excess chakra filtering into the technique. He had noted such an occurrence before, not at all on purpose, he recalled. After first learning the shadow clone technique, there had been times when he overshot the amount of chakra he really needed to use. Being he was currently so seasoned with chakra control, it was only second nature to him to use only the amount needed, and that earlier on he had only been wasting his energy. What he then realized was that it wouldn't have been a waste of chakra at all had he known something could actually come of a clone created by way of surplus chakra. Naruto donated a generous amount more to the jutsu and watched a shadow clone take shape near the river's edge, and violently combust a moment later, sending stones and rubble flying. He ducked, shielding his head from the debris raining down. Okay, that was way too much, but I sort of got it right. Maybe if I just see back on the amount of chakra I use it won't explode. Naruto stood up again and brushed himself off, trying it again, and halved the amount of chakra he had used before. The clone it produced appeared stable enough and Naruto ordered it to transform, curious to see how jutsu and explosions were connected. The clone, perhaps to anger him, used his infamous S-jutsu against him and the blonde face planted on the ground. What? How did that not work? I didn't use too much chakra and there was definitely enough in that one to make something happen, but it could still use a jutsu. He destroyed the impudent Cage Bunshin and then made note that he had not been concentrating as he had while creating the first clone. Yeah, Ero-sensei said the chakra has to be packed tightly in the coils so when it does try to do something it's like a trip wire for the explosion. It began to make more sense to him. Alright, this S is complicated but I am not giving up. Naruto howled, unwilling to give in. Nearly an hour of experimenting with molding chakra and carefully adding excess chakra into an individual clone at last produced a positive result. After pounding the conditions into his head until he did it without much thought, he was able to create a clone that met the requirements and detonated properly. He didn't let his success feed his ego just then. Another hour of practice and he found he could command his clones to ignite silently, and even create 2 clones at a time that were capable of blowing up at different intervals. His chakra reserves were running low as evening hastened, and Naruto collapsed to the ground to rest, running strategies through his head on how to incorporate his new ability into his fighting style. The blonde boy also knew that just because he had been successful didn't mean he had mastered the technique. In a fight he knew he wouldn't have the time to stop and balance out excess chakra and mold it for a clone. It had to be an instantaneous skill that he could use without thinking about it. He was still far from that point but he smiled as he stared up at the sunset. Hey, I've got all week. I'll keep at this until I can blow Ero-sensei's head off without trying. 2 days later, Kankuro was thoroughly impressed with the replacement blades he had received for Karasu. They fit perfectly and were actually an improvement from the blades previously concealed within his puppet. He thanked Tenten by paying more than what was necessary and leaving before she could notice. Rather than chasing the thankful sand ninja down the street, Tenten decided to treat herself and Lee to lunch that day. She chose a nice restaurant and when Lee had asked if Guy-sensei was invited she sheepishly admitted she hadn't been given that much money. So they ate without their teacher around noon and Lee had still been very excitable even without his idol nearby. Tenten felt her appy waver a bit at the sight of Lee ordering curry and eating it like it was ice cream. She was hungry enough to order a large platter of dumplings for them to share. She could not deny her favorite food. While munching on dessert Lee began to ask questions on Neji's whereabouts, being that neither of them had seen him for the past 2 days. I'm not really sure, I guess he's been training with his uncle like he was earlier this week. She theorized and was privately frustrated with the Hyuga prodigy for not having the courtesy to come tell them that himself. The more she began to like Neji the more she found he got on her nerves. Maybe I care too much, that could explain why my head hasn't been screwed on straight recently. Lee eyed the platter of dumplings settled between them on the table with the beginnings of an idea visible on his face. Tenten, do you suppose our teammate has had anything to eat yet this afternoon? Probably not. Why? He stood, grinning. We will deliver these fine dumplings to him as a peace offering, and in the process, find out why he has been avoiding us. That's a brilliant plan, Lee, she said it with sincerity. I don't know if he likes these all that much, though. Lee dismissed the thought and she paid for their meal before following him to the Hyuga compound, wondering if it was a better idea than she had first assumed. They ambushed him while he was meditating, very successful in startling him. Tenten found his astounded face very amusing and couldn't help but grin as Lee practically forced Neji to eat the food they had brought for him. Go ahead, my eternal rival. This food will fuel your soul. Hardly, Neji muttered, taking a seat again in the grass of the lawn, and Lee and Tenten sat down beside him, watching as he grudgingly helped himself to a dumpling and bit into it, all in the hope they'd stop staring at him. You've disappeared off the face of the planet for the past few days, Neji, Tenten purposefully exaggerated to indicate that they were concerned. What have you been up to? Neji looked at her for a long moment. I was being evaluated. There was a moment in which Lee and Tenten exchanged a confused glance, wondering if that in any way answered the question correctly. I am the new Hyuga clan heir. Somewhere in the village a window shattered and a cat's tail was run over by a bicycle. They looked at Neji with wide eyes, quite stunned. You look shocked, Neji pointed out flatly, as if they weren't supposed to. I wonder when he intended to come and find us so he could tell us this. Tenten thought in exasperation, but she honestly knew there was no point in getting worked up again. The lure was his now, fair and square, even if he had to beat down several people in his way to earn it. Congratulations then, Neji. Lee looked genuinely glad for him, something Tenten had not been expecting. Maybe perhaps because she was still touchy on the subject of Neji vying with his younger cousin in order to be granted her lure. Neji seemed to notice her disappointment. Hinata-sama was not at all upset that I replaced her. She is still part of the main house, as is Hanabi-sama. My uncle did what he judged to be right. I see, well then, Tenten smiled at him. I'm glad, Neji. This is great, I mean, you've really worked hard for this. Like Lee said, congratulations. Neji's eyes softened on her and he seemed to have a boost in confidence. Perhaps being the new heir to his clan was giving him some anxiety, Tenten wondered. And of course, Lee's curiosity had bad timing, so you will still be training with us, yes. There was a silence and Tenten felt her stomach do some horrifying acrobatics. It isn't very likely, Neji answered, looking as if he wasn't troubled by the idea. Lee's eyes flickered worriedly over to Tenten, sensing her distress, and he wondered if he may have said something very, very stupid. It isn't very likely. She paused to think it over again. Isn't likely. Tenten's eyes narrowed and she suddenly found that no amount of apologizing was going to fix her new foul mood. As if the Hyuga prodigy was going to apologize when he hadn't even realized how deeply he had insulted her. She reached out and took a dumpling from the platter and took a fierce chomp out of the morsel, knowing that would be enough at the time to keep her from screaming at the top of her lungs. Isn't likely, he says. Why do I even bother? Lee looked horrified as she stood and began to walk away mechanically, knowing that he'd never forgive himself if he let Tenten drown in her own despair while there was something he could have done about it. So he did something very bold and turned to Neji. Neji. My eternal rival. Please understand women have very delicate feelings and that you may have offended Tenten by forsaking training with her. Neji gave him an incredulous look, offended. It's nothing personal, she shouldn't. Tenten continued to walk away but Neji was finally watching her leave, and Lee prayed that the Hyuga prodigy held at least a school of compassion for her. For the sake of preserving your friendship with the beautiful flower of our team, I must insist you do something. Neji didn't take too well to Lee's pleading, maybe because it seemed like a command. Even if he didn't say it, Neji was worried that he had upset Tenten. Lee found it was exceptionally hard to explain Tenten's feelings to Neji without giving away too much. He stood up, almost frantic, and pondered what Guy-sensei would do. Neji, fed up with the cryptic behavior of his teammates, stood up and threw a kunai at the back of Tenten's head. Angrily, she blocked it and wheeled around, throwing a dozen shuriken back at him. It wasn't what Lee had in mind when they had first intended to feed Neji. Tenten stomped back to the two boys, no longer containing her anger. Why not train with us, Neji? She continued to block his incoming projectiles. Are we that disposable to you? Is this what you want? He shouted. He was at least trying to understand what had her so upset. Training with my clan is something you object to. They finally stopped throwing projectiles at each other and Lee calmed down marginally. Tenten could see he still didn't fully grasp the point of why they had even stopped by the Hyuga estate to see him, and decided to dumb it down a bit so he could comprehend. You're from a prestigious clan, yes, she admitted, but you can't use primary or hidden lotus. Lee found that obvious. You and your uncle can't shoot an arrow several hundred yards accurately, and no one here can summon weapons as rapidly as I can. There are so many things you Hyuga can't do. No one will replace us. There is no one here who even comes close to how Lee and I support you. Tenten hoped she was being clear enough on how unique she and Lee were. Neji understood her point, but wasn't going to concede as if he had done something wrong. You have no right to doubt my family. Like hell I do, Tenten groaned mentally, and decided his pride needed to be attacked if he was going to let her win this argument. She reached into her hip pouch and drew out a scroll. She gracefully summoned Shinigami. At first Neji suspected she was picking a fight, but he was puzzled when she dropped the monstrous Zanbato to the ground in front of him and the blade sunk into the damp soil like a fang into F. Of course I have a right to doubt your family. I'm your teammate. I know you better than they do. Tenten rested her hand on her hip. I'll tell you what, if you can pick it up I'll believe you. Prove to me that is something a Hyuga can do. Neji was fully aware that he couldn't, not without hurting himself and looking like a fool. Lee, seeing his reluctance, snickered playfully and Neji scowled at him. Deciding that he'd be defeated before he even tried, he attempted to budge to Zanbato. Neji got a fair amount of leverage on it, but holding a sword a few inches off of the ground hardly counts as lifting, Tenten scoffed. He dropped it quickly anyway. His face was furious. They started laughing at him and his mood began to sour. He would not let himself be patronized. This is pointless, Tenten. She unsummoned the sword and sighed, wishing that he would lighten up. The point is that we're your friends, Neji. Because of that you shouldn't turn your back on us. We'd never do that to you. Lee agreed ardently. It is true, Neji. He smirked knowingly before following after Tenten. We will see you at our training grounds tomorrow. Once they had left they had made the point quite vividly, if not ridiculously. Neji decided he'd excuse their behavior and succumb to their demands if they had to be so difficult about it. He looked down at the ground and saw that the platter of dumplings was still there waiting for him. Neji smiled at the sight of it. Late that night, Jiraiya wasn't surprised to discover Tsunade sulking at a bar in the town. He took a seat beside her and ordered a drink for himself. She greeted him with a non-committal grunt when he turned to her, hoping persistence would remind her of her loyalty to the leaf. Tsunade, I know you've endured a lot of pain, but you really have no excuse for turning your back on Konoha, Jiraiya said quietly, tipping some sake into his cup. It's what they'd want you to do, Nawaki and Dan. You have the chance to fulfill their dreams. Jiraiya. He looked at her expectantly. Tsunade lifted her glass to her lips. Shut up, Jiraiya. After several knocks on the door to his hotel room, Naruto managed to muster the strength to roll out of bed and answer it. He was surprised to see Shizune and he was unsure of why she had come. Naruto, is it? I need to talk to you about something. This late at night? Shizune nodded. Yes. I just want you to know that Tsunade-sama has suffered many tragedies in her life and that I really don't think you should be testing her when she's in such an emotionally fragile state. But I still have to fight her, sis. Naruto reasoned, yawning. I'd look like a coward if I let her win. She can't talk trash about being Hokage, not on my watch. If you push her too far, she may end up making some very bad decisions. Shizune argued, but then relaxed. Naruto, that necklace you're competing with her for, everyone who has worn it in the past, has wearing it. The blonde boy looked at her for a long moment and Shizune wondered if he really cared about the necklace's curse. Sis, I understand what you're trying to do, but I can't back down, Naruto answered, undeterred. She'll either accept that she's the next Hokage or I'll make her accept it. The following day Kakashi was still recovering from his fight with Itachi, and had not been pleased to hear that Sasuke had also been injured while encountering him. For the moment he sat cross-legged on his bed, looking over a scroll he had been given that detailed past information on Itachi. Pakken was sprawled out beside him and perked up his ears when he noted a third presence nearby. Someone's at the door. Go answer it then, please. With an annoyed grumble, Pakken slid off of the bed and trotted out of the bedroom, towards the front door. One sniff told him who had stopped by and he pulled on a rag that had been specifically tied to the doorknob for him. He opened the door and said, "Come on in, kid." "Hey there, Pakken." Sato gave the pug a pat on the head in greeting and closed the door behind him. "I came to see how my uncle's doing." "He's fine, but he's looked better." Kakashi shuffled out of his bedroom, cracking his shoulders as he stretched. "Well, isn't this a surprise? I didn't think you'd be paying me a visit today, Sato-kun." I was just curious to see if it was true that you got your butt kicked by some crazy Nukanen, the Genin explained, following his uncle into the kitchen. They said you were totally out of commission. While retrieving 2 glasses from a cabinet, Kakashi gave the boy a sideways glance. You heard correctly, but as you can see I'm good as new now. Sato's cheerful expression began to weaken. His uncle frowned from beneath his mask. Maybe I'm not exactly as good as new. He poured milk into each of the glasses and returned the carton back to the refrigerator. He probably knows better than anyone when I'm not at full strength. It's as if he can sense it. Thanks, Kakashi. Sato accepted the glass he was offered and sat across from him at the table. He was quiet for a moment after that, fingering at his drink disinterestedly. What's on your mind? Kakashi could tell something was troubling the boy. I was afraid because I didn't find out until after it happened, the silver-haired boy said softly. I was worried. Worried? Of what? Sato raised his midnight eyes, his face serious. I was worried because I knew that if you s that day then I'd really be alone, and there wouldn't be anything I could do about it. His voice lowered. It'd be just like when Mom s. Kakashi understood and silence filled the room as he recalled his older sister. She hadn't been a very popular topic of discussion, for him, at least. Sato sipped at the milk half-heartedly, trying to settle his nerves. Your mother became very ill after she married your father. He wasn't certain how to explain it to his nephew. Her health only worsened after you were born. I know that, Sato confirmed. He had already learned how leukemia was not easy to live with, and that she had put up a strong fight during her life to conquer it. Pakken, from his place on the floor beside the table, began to grow nervous. It had been several years since Kakashi had approached the subject of his sister and it only opened up old wounds. He and Semi never saw eye to eye, not once, though Kakashi still tried to protect her when he could. The main quarrel that had created such a large gap in Kakashi's relationship with her was the s of their father when they were children. Semi still respected and cared for her father even after his humiliating error on a past mission that tarnished his honor. Kakashi told her she was a fool to still revere Tsukumo after his failure to secure the safety of the village, but she had never paid him any heed. They began to grow apart after that, and she had always tried to show him that living by the book would never truly bring happiness to his life. And then she met that tramp from Hidden Dragonfly, Rie, Pakken recalled, smiling in spite of himself. He was the most reckless, high-spirited Junin to ever live in Leaf, and the bane of Kakashi's professional existence. Sato leaned his elbows on the table, his eyes dancing with a painful memory of his past. At 8 years old, Sato was the average student at the academy. It was the only time in his life when he had been truly and innocently devoted to his studies to become a shinobi. He sat near the back of the classroom close to Chuji. His nose was buried in a scroll Iruka had handed out and given him a short time to look over. A few rows ahead of him Naruto chatted loudly with Sakura, making it slightly difficult for him to concentrate. Sato had been working increasingly hard at school since his mother had to be admitted to the hospital for the 3rd time that year. More and more treatments were necessary to keep her retreating health in check. At the front of the classroom, a Junin who he did not recognize poked his head in the door and pulled Iruka aside to speak with him. A few other students looked up and then lost interest in the newcomer when he stepped outside of the classroom again. Sato, please come down for a moment, Iruka called to him, and the silver-haired boy rose from his seat and reported to Iruka obediently, there is a man here who would like to speak with you. Sure thing, Iruka-sensei. Sato stepped out into the hallway, sliding the door closed behind him. The Junin's face was riddled with burn marks and his right eye was unusually discolored. Sato could tell from his first glance at the ninja. His expression was solemn and for a moment he wondered why he had been pulled aside at all. He assumed it was retribution for one of his more recent pranks with Naruto's caboodle. Hitaki Sato, yes. The man confirmed and the boy nodded. Would you like to go outside for some fresh air? Sato raised his eyebrows at the offer. Yeah, I'd like that. Ah. Am I in trouble, sir? No, kid, you're not in trouble. That was Sato's first indication that something was not right. He followed the man out to the courtyard and they waited for a different class to go inside the building after recess before beginning the discussion. Sit down, Sato. The Junin ordered and the silver-haired boy plopped down on a bench behind him compliantly. Is everything all right? You're a Junin. Does this have something to do with my uncle? Is he okay? Sato felt his stomach lurch with anxiety. Kakashi is fine, but, the Junin paused, averting his eyes from the boy. Semi is not. Your mother passed away about an hour ago, Sato. At first came denial. What? You're crazy, man. I just talked to my mom this morning before going to school. She was feeling great. I really am sorry, kid. The Junin looked at him again, sadness visible in his expression. I came here to bring you to the Hokage, actually. He wants to talk to you about your options. My options. You haven't even graduated, kid. You'll need some counseling so you can. Sato had sprung up from the bench and ran from the schoolyard, not wanting to hear another word. After he had mentioned the Hokage being involved, he knew the man had been telling the truth, but it didn't register in his mind. His mother was his pillar and his motivation. She was sick every day of her life and she never once complained. She couldn't be S. Not yet. She wasn't allowed to S until he had said goodbye, not until he was ready. You're fine. You're fine. I know you're still here. You wouldn't leave me without letting me see you first. His thoughts had totally rejected the idea of death and were replaced with delusions of farewells and comfort. I'll see you again. Sato's sandals hit the ground with heavy steps as he burst into the hospital, knowing its layout well since he had become a frequent visitor. The nurses he raced by wondered what a child was doing on his own during school hours. Just let me say goodbye. His face was wet and he couldn't see clearly through the tears. They dripped down his cheeks like fire as he felt like reality was gaining on him. He had to run faster to escape it. He was nearly there. Her room was on the second floor, first door on the right. Sato rushed into the room with a bang, putting a dent in the wall after he had flung the door so forcefully. Sato skidded to a halt. The room had been emptied. Reality caught up at last. Just let me say goodbye. Then came the hysterics. He became disoriented from crying and the lack of oxygen in his lungs. He had never run through the village so fast in his entire life. He had never had a reason to. Mom. Sato bumped into the panel of the doorway as he stumbled back into the hall, scraping his shoulder painfully. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, his face burning from the salt. He didn't care that there were other sick patients in the wing he was disturbing. The only one who mattered was gone now and he refused to let her be forgotten so easily. Mom. He trembled in a large circle, howling, sobbing, fumbling along the wall until an Anbu guard seized him roughly and attempted to quiet him as patients poked their heads out of their respective rooms along the hall. The Anbu, a woman, kneeled for him and let the silver-haired student curl into her while he cried, knowing his pain could only be cured with understanding. Sato peeked over the Kanoiki's shoulder and saw a blurry Sandaime alongside Kakashi approaching him from down the hallway. Goodbye. Sato gulped down his milk. His tea felt dry as he recalled the day his mother s. It was probably because he had screamed himself hoarse. You know, you didn't look very sad when Mom s that day. The boy commented guardedly. I was, Sato. Believe me, sadness tends to follow me and my loved ones around. But he didn't believe him, not really. Even if Kakashi had in fact been sad that day, he still hadn't shown it, and that was why Sato began to understand why his mother had always been so tense around his uncle. Kakashi sighed while pulling his mask down below his chin, taking a leisurely sip of milk. Sato watched his face curiously for a moment. He has stubble. Looks like he had enough energy to at least shave this morning. It had reminded him of the first time he had seen his uncle's face. It had been the day of the funeral. It was drizzling lightly that day. The sky was gray and empty and not many people had come to honor Semi, something that had troubled Sato. Had all of her friends disappeared that day? Or were they too overcome with grief to face the truth? I won't run from the truth. He remembered standing under a big umbrella with Tama, and the way her hair had been tied up with ribbons. His mother had loved when her hair was tied up pretty, so she did it that day and the days that followed. Most of all, he remembered the way Tama held his hand. He wanted her to, but he didn't ask. Then like magic during the service their fingers were laced and his sea felt far less heavy. Sato stared at the shrine dedicated to his mother and he felt that pieces of him had broken off and crumbled away since her death. He knew he'd never feel whole again no matter what he did. He watched Tama's parents and her uncle leave white flowers on the memorial. At least they would remember her too, remember how wonderful she was. I won't forget you. When it had ended, Sato had been invited to spend the rest of the day with the Mito family so they could comfort him and offer their condolences. Before he left with them, Kakashi had gently pulled him aside. Sato had been annoyed that he didn't have an umbrella with him. "I don't want to get wet, please." To compensate, they took shelter from the light rain beneath a leafy tree that provided some cover from the drizzle. "Can you see?" Sato looked up at his taller relative, frowning. "See what, Kakashi?" The Junin kneeled down to be level with him, and it was then he finally noticed he had pulled his mask down, giving him a clear view of his face. The boy's surprise was not well hidden. Kakashi didn't look like he had imagined him to. His face was rather plain but with clear, pale skin, and his mouth was drawn into a dispirited frown. "You look like Mom," Sato pointed out. "Why did you do that?" "Because," Kakashi's voice was quiet, "it's what she asked me to do when this happened." Sato nodded dumbly, understanding it a little. He felt better after that. Kakashi stood up again and it had at last stopped raining. Sato walked beside him as they stepped out into the open again, and then he paused, curious. Kakashi. His uncle looked down at him when they had stopped walking. They were the only ones left at the memorial. "Does this mean, I'm going to live with you from now on, Kakashi?" His uncle pulled his mask back up over his nose and looked up at the gloomy sky. "No." Sato finished drinking his milk. Pakken had settled on the couch in the living room for a nap, drained from waiting on Kakashi's requests for the past few days. "Kakashi." He looked across the table to his nephew to let him know he had his attention. "Why didn't you let me stay with you?" Kakashi lowered his glass back down to the table. "I was in no position to raise a child, Sato." "That's such a load of bull s." His nephew growled, hating the excuse. "You just didn't want to." "I needed you." His uncle looked at him for a long moment. His expression was clearly visible without his mask on. "The Mito family has always looked after you. It isn't as if you were left dangling." "It wasn't enough," Sato snapped, and he knew Kakashi knew it too. "You are my last beacon, not them. I'll be with them for the rest of my life, but as far as my family goes, you're all I have left. Things are better this way, Sato." The boy's eyes narrowed challengingly. "I know you hated my father. Is that why you hate me too? Can't you at least pretend you care about me even a little?" Sato's voice softened. "I'm always stuck worrying about the day you get yourself K, because I never really know where you are or what you're doing. But you couldn't care less about what happens to me." Kakashi's frown deepened. "That isn't true. You know I did what I could to look out for you. So what? You make sure I'm not sick or you'll teach me the Chidori and other jutsu, but you never stick around long enough to hang out with me. In the end you avoid me whenever you can." Pakken listened from the couch with his eyes hidden beneath his floppy ears, cringing as the two spoke. Sato stood suddenly and his fist down on the table, toppling over Kakashi's glass of milk. "Just say it already. You like Sasuke better than me. Is it because he has the Sharingan like you? Or is it because he reminds you of Obito?" A strange silence followed. "Shut up." The genin refused to let the tears in his eyes overwhelm him. "Tama is the one who's been raising me and looking out for me, and it isn't even her job yet. But you have no excuse. I'll never forgive you for abandoning me." It was quiet again and Pakken scuttled out of the room, upset by the shouting. Sasuke is nothing like Obito was. That was the last straw for Sato, and it was then he forgot all restraint. He was tired of crying, especially in front of his uncle. Maybe he'll get my eye poked out too, and if I beg Sasuke long enough, he'll donate a Sharingan to my cause. Or just K me and put me out of my misery. Get out. Gladly. Sato moved back his chair and went to the door. "Don't get yourself K anytime soon." After he had gone, Kakashi pulled his mask back up, wondering how a child could tear at his heartstrings so. The milk that had been spilled earlier was all over the floor, and even though his mood barely permitted it, Kakashi began to clean up the mess anyway. 3 days later, Jiraiya and Naruto could tell something was wrong when Shizune appeared before them that morning, looking frantic. "Tsunade-sama has gone missing, Jiraiya-sama," she admitted, cross with herself. "I'm worried. If we don't find her soon, she may accept his offer." "Whose offer?" Jiraiya asked, sensing it couldn't be good. "Orochimaru's offer," Shizune admitted quietly, upset that she and Tsunade had hid it from Jiraiya. Naruto, it seemed, could tell that there would be no use in wasting time. "Then we've got to find her before the snake bastard causes trouble. Why did you let her sneak away?" I didn't. She slipped something in my drink last night and when I woke up this morning I couldn't find her anywhere. The black-haired woman explained, the pig beside her grunting in agreement. I suspect she must have slipped me something too when I last saw her, Jiraiya added, following Shizune and his pupil as they raced through the streets, looking for signs of Tsunade. It's restraining my chakra so it could be problematic. Shizune apologized on Tsunade's behalf to the Toad Sage and Naruto recalled how Orochimaru had caused grief for him before. He put that mark on Haku-kun and made Gaara-kun lose control of his demon. Now he's going after Bar-chan too. Their first clue that they were getting closer to finding her was the demolished wall and craters leading away from it. Signs of a fight. Tsunade-sama must have turned down his offer to and tried to K him. Shizune guessed and then quickly collected Tsunade's jacket from the ground where it had been discarded. We have to hurry. She turned to the pig next to her. Tun, can you track her scent? The small pig squealed in confirmation and darted ahead. The three shinobi followed her without question. Orochimaru and Kabuto had forced the fight into a wide, open field outside the town. Kabuto fought toe-to-toe with Tsunade, his hand glowing with blue chakra that was intended to sever muscles and tendons when striking an enemy. Tsunade's brute strength was enough to keep the traitorous Mednin at bay. One hit would be more than enough to pulverize him. After an exchange of unsuccessful blows, Tsunade saw an opening in his defenses and prepared to land a blow to his end that would K him instantly. Kabuto, thinking quickly, his hand with a kunai he had been wielding, and splattered his opponent with his own bi and freezing her in her tracks. Once she had slowed down, he smacked her away and sent her tumbling to the dirt. My, Tsunade. It looks as if a little bee is still enough to defeat you. From afar Orochimaru watched with great amusement, knowing it wouldn't take much longer before Tsunade would crack and agree to his terms. Kabuto's hand glowed with chakra again, poised to finish her off, but before he could attack a smoke bomb went off in front of his face and forced him to back away. Naruto and Jiraiya with Shizune and Tun at their heels stepped in front of the shuddering blonde woman who was too overcome by her fear of B to continue fighting. The Snake Sanin noted such a turn of events was unfortunate, they'll only complicate things. The blonde boy was not very surprised to see Kabuto wearing a sound headband, remembering him and his facade during the Chunin exam. Gaara-kun knew you were a fraud the second he saw you, Kabuto. I'll make you pay for what you did to him. Jiraiya hadn't expected his pupil to know the enemies he was facing so well. Kabuto smirked at Naruto, not very threatened. What? I didn't do anything to hurt him. I just helped him get in touch with his inner self is all. Shizune kneeled beside Tsunade, covering her with her green jacket. I'll look after you, Tsunade-sama. Kabuto returned to Orochimaru's side a moment later, preparing to aid the Snake Sanin in summoning. Jiraiya, recognizing their strategy from afar, also bit his thumb and formed hand seals, intending to counter their summon with one of his own. Smoke erupted on both ends of the field. Two huge snakes appeared for Orochimaru and Kabuto, and Gamakichi bounced excitedly on front of Jiraiya. Hey. It's been a while since I was last summoned. How's it going? Jiraiya only sighed, upset that the drug had not yet run its course through his system. Orochimaru laughed at his former teammate's pathetic display, just as worthless as always, Jiraiya. Oh give me a break, Ero-sensei. Naruto groaned, biting his own thumb, and summoned a massive golden toad with a large sword slung on its back. Orochimaru fell silent with rage upon seeing the Kyuubi container summon a powerful toad for his mentor. Gamakichi hopped a safe distance away from the battle site while Shizune looked on in awe as Naruto and Jiraiya stood on the larger toad's head. How can Naruto be as skilled as Jiraiya-sama in summoning already? Thanks Naruto. Jiraiya smirked at his student and Naruto nodded to him, getting ready to fight. The summoned creatures dove for each other. Kabuto and Naruto leapt from their respective sides, meeting in the air and crashed to the ground in a fierce tussle. Naruto used his shadow clones to probe Kabuto's defenses as he had for Tsunade, using combination attacks that drove him further back towards a rocky outcrop. Three of the clones surrounding Kabuto exploded on a silent cue, barely giving him an inch to evade. Kabuto L through the remainder of the clones with his chakra-enhanced hand, and leapt back in surprise when Naruto had unexpectedly called two fair-sized battle toads. One of them S wildly at the sound ninja with its dagger, missing him, and C into its fellow toad instead. Naruto growled to himself, upset with the poor performance. their coordination isn't exactly what it normally is. Down one toad, Naruto continued attacking Kabuto, grateful when Shizune joined the fray, firing senbon at the enemy. Kabuto knocked Naruto back with a relentless kick that sent him tumbling down a nearby hill, and Shizune seized the opportunity to attack Kabuto, Ninpo, Poison Fog. She spat a cloud of poisonous gas at Kabuto, upset to see he knew better than to make the mistake of inhaling any of it, and then disappeared when the mist subsided. Where did he? He countered her attack from underground, grabbing her legs and severing her tendons with a well-placed jab. Shizune fell to the ground helplessly as Kabuto came out of his hiding place, firing senbon at him and missing by inches. When Naruto kicked Kabuto in the back of the head, he did it exceptionally hard. The silver-haired medic tumbled to the ground, his eyes blurred, and hobbled to his feet to take a moment of rest. You're not much of a threat without your teammates, are you, Naruto-kun? You were all big talk during the exam, but now it seems it'll be hard for you to live up to all of your ideals. You should be worried about fighting just me alone, Naruto rasped, catching his breath, but if Haku-kun and Gaara-kun were here with me, you'd be S already. Kabuto focused chakra into his hand again and attempted to charge forward, and was horrified to find an insidiously long tongue had seized him from behind, the other toad. He was distracting me so I wouldn't notice I'd forgotten it. With Kabuto firmly held in place, Naruto ran ahead with a fully charged Rasengan S into the traitor fearlessly and getting jabbed in the sea in the process. Tsunade watched in wonder from her spot nearby, never expecting to see such power and bravery from a young boy. Kabuto was hurled back, crashing into the toad with a puff of smoke, and sent careening several yards until he S into a large boulder. Naruto smiled, glad that he had won. A moment later, he coughed up B as a result from Kabuto's attack. This can't be good. He fell backwards, unconscious. Naruto. Tsunade struggled to her feet and stumbled over to the blonde boy, knowing something was wrong. She listened for a heartbeat and found that the struggling sound she heard was the sign of the heart muscles tearing. I've got to hurry. It's not too late. She tore the boy's shirt open and immediately employed her mystical palm healing jutsu to repair the damage. A fair distance away, Kabuto attempted to heal himself of the injury inflicted upon him, but found the Kyuubi's chakra was just too intense for him to overcome. Frustrated that he'd no longer be able to fight, Kabuto had one last shot at Tsunade's pride. I see off his chakra network from the Kyuubi so he can't use its healing abilities. Hey, there's nothing you can do to save him. He's S. Shut your mouth, Kabuto. Tsunade howled, unwilling to give in. Naruto's breathing stopped and she began to panic. No. Not yet. I won't let you S. You'll be alright. From within the seal, the Kyuubi could sense Naruto's life force waning. It's beginning to shrink in here. It isn't time yet. Tsunade began to cry hopelessly upon seeing her technique had little effect on his damaged cells. It was the same way she had lost her loved ones, Nawaki and Dan, and she couldn't bear it all over again. Hey, Bar-chan. She stared down at the boy as he reached up for the necklace dangling around her neck. Still up for that rematch. He fell quiet, but Tsunade knew it was enough confirmation that the Kyuubi's healing powers, or perhaps her own, had been potent enough to repair some damage that had been threatening Naruto's life. Rest now, Naruto. I'll protect you. She leaned down, removing her necklace and replaced it on the blonde boy, knowing he had earned it. Far off to the left, Jiraiya and his toad had managed to corner the two massive snakes Orochimaru had summoned in a smaller but no less effective dark swamp. Fending off Jiraiya's blows was much easier for Orochimaru with his opponent still struggling to call upon chakra. He took notice that Naruto had prevailed over Kabuto and yet remained alive after the struggle. I had thought he'd make a fine gift for the Akatsuki after our first meeting. Now it seems the brat has a penchant for interfering. Someone like that should be dealt with swiftly. Orochimaru leapt from his place atop his summoned snake and Jiraiya was caught off guard. Hey. The toad sage immediately pursued him, only to be wrapped up in his foe's extended tongue and hurled to the ground from their unsafe height. Jiraiya crashed painfully into the rocky ground below, too stunned to move. The Kusanagi appeared in Orochimaru's mouth and he made a beeline for Naruto, intent on skewering the defenseless boy. This ends now. His attack was halted when he hit Tsunade instead, her in the sea. Orochimaru glared at her interference. Don't be a fool, Tsunade. This boy is too dangerous to be kept alive. Get out of my way. No. The woman backed away from the sword, Determined to keep going, I'm ready to put my life on the line too. I will protect this boy in the Hidden Leaf Village. Her eyes were crazed as she challenged Orochimaru. I'll BS before I let you touch him. It's pointless to risk everything for one worthless village. Orochimaru yowled, attacking with his sword again, and Tsunade again defended against it, finally able to get past her hemophobia. Orochimaru hadn't expected her to recover from her fear so abruptly. Tsunade, horridly wounded, still refused to be defeated. She tapped into the yin seal on her forehead that contained a deep reservoir of chakra, Sozo Saisei. The seal on her forehead elongated into vectoring shapes on her skin, and the stored chakra immediately healed all of her wounds. Orochimaru was impressed with her technique. I should have known you would have created a jutsu of your own after all these years. Jiraiya was finally able to shake off his injuries after the drug had left his system and regrouped, seeing Orochimaru had not yet won. Tsunade wiped a bit of bee from her shoulder, preparing to summon. Orochimaru, you're going to S here. Orochimaru quickly reunited with Kabuto, also preparing to summon again, and Jiraiya wasn't about to be left out of the party either. Kuchio's no jutsu. The three boss summons appeared at the same time, towering high above the ground. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.